Hi, today I want to talk about the Poetics of Wabi-Sabi. Please refer to your handout called the Poetics of Wabi-Sabi handout. Um, I talked before about the underglimmer, the idea connected to Basho, and this idea of Wabi-Sabi is also connected to Japan, and it's an aesthetic. It's like a lens that you can use for looking at art. And I really like it because it comes from the idea of imperfection and transience. It's the opposite of surfaces and perfectionism. It's interested in what's looking underneath, and it has a consciousness, like an awareness of decay and death. So the definition of it is, as I put at the top of the sheet that you have, it's an aesthetic and a worldview that focuses on finding beauty within the imperfections of life and accepting peacefully the cycle of growth and decay. So it's the kind of art that allows a humanness inside of it. So I'm talking about poetry. So I'm going to try to give a couple of examples and just point to, I guess, the where your poems are imperfect, I think, are the places where it becomes more interesting. So I've said a lot that I would like, if you're a student writing poems, you want, if you're just learning, you want your poems to be unlike anybody else's. You want them to have a voice which is very distinct. And the reader is surprised and refreshed when they come across a voice which is distinct. It's not like any other one, because we're used to hearing BS all day long. We're used to seeing TV commercials where people try to tell us that they're our friends. We're used to a lot of faking going on in the world. So when we can hear a true and clear voice, which has a wisdom underneath it, it is kind of refreshing and a little bit shocking to us. It kind of wakes us into attention in a way which we really respect and love, I think. So let me break down this word a little bit, wabi and sabi. So let me say, first of all, that this is my idea and my deeply subjective appreciation of a Japanese concept. And it comes from a tea ceremony, and it's very, very old. And so I'm just giving you a very surface idea of it and very quick. So wabi, it comes from the two words, wabi and sabi. So wabi initially referred to the loneliness of living in nature, remote from society. And then, so it's the feeling of being in nature and a certain loneliness. And then sabi was like the decay side, like a sense of feeling withered and death and decay. So now, this is the old version of the word, and then now it's kind of grown. Wabi now connotes rustic simplicity and freshness and quietness, and a kind of understated elegance. And sabi is the beauty or serenity that comes with age, evidenced with the wear and tear on an object. So where you can see the trace of something from the past or the wear and tear on the object, that's when it becomes interesting, right? So the way that I think the Japanese have talked about it a lot are in terms of pots and pottery. So this is where the pot wobbles a little bit, where it's a little bit off kilter, is that's what eccentric means, right? A circle that's eccentric is just a little bit off. And this is where we become human and imperfect. We don't want to be perfect, I don't think, in our artwork. We want to show how we are off center, how we're off kilter. And I think our way of being off kilter is distinctly ours. And it's fascinating to other people. But first we have to try to have an awareness of our own speech patterns and our own, the ways that we're distinct and weird and different. So the first time I came across this word, I'll say real quickly, was a girlfriend of mine, maybe 15 years ago, and I were walking in Montreal, and she was quite brilliant, and she was an artist. And she walked up, we were walking past this storefront. It was a bank and a big window. And she walked up and she said, "Hey, look." I said, "What?" And she said, "Look at that thumbprint." There was a little thumbprint on the window, like somebody had touched it. Or God knows it was a bank. Maybe they were like, "Help." I don't know. But there was a little print, a fingerprint on there. She said, "Look, it's like wabi-sabi." And I said, it's like what? And she said, it's like that, the faint residue of something that has happened in the past that leaves an imprint on the present. It's wabi-sabi. My teacher was telling me about it. So I was fascinated by this, and I looked it up, and I found an associated word, sillage, 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 which is when you're in a room and you smell the perfume of the person who was in the room before. And so it's like this residue. And so it's like the sense that everything we're coming to has the thumbprints and the perfume and everything we come to has been touched before. Even if it's a new house, it's been touched by construction workers. And everything that we see has the residue of all the people who came before it. And I think the thing about art, and particularly poetry, is we don't want to, like, the lines grow in density and interest when we allow all of the humanness in and all the other fingerprints that are on us, our background and our heritage and the fingerprints that are on us from our family and on our friends. We want all of that, the eccentricity and the sillage, to come out onto the poem, to add to the thickness of the lines, which creates a real interest, I think. So it's basically, wabi-sabi is this idea. So think of the loneliness in nature and the evidence of decay, the allowing of imperfections, which is also a sense of impermanence. And it's not so interested in surfaces, it's interested in what's underneath. So not so much the face, but the feelings. Not so much the surfaces, but the undercurrent. Anyway, it's a deeply difficult, obviously, thing to describe, but all things that are interesting are difficult to describe, I think. So it ends up being quite subjective. So it ends up being yours, which I think is partly why it's so fascinating. So I'm going to separate it into three basic ideas, wabi-sabi. First, evidence of decay. Second, impermanence. And third, a trace of something left. I think you could separate it in lots of ways, but these to me seem like distinct aspects of wabi-sabi. So on the attached sheet, I have a couple of poems and a couple of quotes, and the first one I really like. It's from Leonard Cohen's song called Anthem, where he says, "There's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in." I think that idea is definitely, it captures the spirit of wabi-sabi, and Leonard Cohen was interested in Eastern philosophy and Buddhism. This idea of the crack is usually we're trying to seem like perfect things, but actually people I don't think, fall in love with us or like us or want to read our poems until they see how we're a little bit off kilter. And once we admit to that and own it and double down, we're like, yeah, I'm weird, and that's interesting to the people around us, I think, or at least interesting to the people who I like. So there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So in the world that we're in now, that's interested in a lot of perfections, it's interested in surfaces, the art that tells us the truth, I think, admits to failure and admits to humanness, and it goes a little bit deeper, I think. It's these mistakes that make us human. And if we can admit to these mistakes in our poems, it adds to the density and the deep perfume and the deep connection between the people around us and the poem and ourselves. So one poem I'd like to read is by one of my heroes, Jack Gilbert, who was from Pittsburgh. Failing and Flying. This is in the sheets that I gave you. Everyone forgets that Icarus also flew. It's the same when love comes to an end, or the marriage fails and people say they knew it was a mistake, that everybody said it would never work, that she was old enough to know better. But anything worth doing is worth doing badly. Like being there by that summer ocean, on the other side of the island, while love was fading out of her. The stars burning so extravagantly those nights, and anyone could tell you they would never last. Every morning she was asleep in my bed like a visitation, the gentleness in her like antelope standing in the dawn mist. Each afternoon I watched her coming back through the hot, stony field after swimming, the sea light behind her and the huge sky on the other side of that. Listened to her while we ate lunch. How can they say the marriage failed? Like the people who came back from Provence, when it was Provence, and said it was pretty but the food was greasy. I believe Icarus was not failing as he fell, but just coming to the end of his triumph. So notice in that poem how he takes an example from his own life, having been married and having this be a failure. There's this moment that he finds. I think he was living in Greece at the time, and noticing the person who you're next to kind of fading away and their love vanishing. And it's sad, yeah, but it doesn't erase all the beautiful things that happened. And it, in a way, if we don't seize on the victimness of it and the tragedy of it, even the departing of love is just another aspect of life and can be quite beautiful. And notice also how he chose something which is so deeply personal and so relevant to his life, and he gave it to us. It's a kind of a gift. So we're able to go through this by proxy. We're able to read something that happened to him and go through it ourselves in a very mild way, and so have a little cathartic release ourselves. So he's given us this. Anyway, the idea of the poem being that failure is okay, which I think is it's a kind of release, isn't it? Like we don't have to worry so much about it after we read that. Of the 4 poems I gave you, I guess I could separate them into neat categories, but I kind of don't want to. But the second one is the second idea I wanted to look at. The first one is the evidence of decay, and connected to that was Leonard Cohen. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And the idea of Jack Gilbert's poem, which is that failing is just coming to the end of your triumph, and it doesn't matter. We all fail, and it's just part of being human, which is fine. The second idea I want to look at is impermanence. So this is the idea that everything is in flux all the time. Everything is changing. And the Heraclitus quote that I gave is probably the most famous in existence about this idea. You can't step into the same river twice, meaning as you step into the same river, you're changing, the river's changing, everything is changing all the time. And we have an impulse to not change, but life is changing anyway. So this is a kind of wisdom, I think. And if we can get that in our poems, not to hold on to what we were or anything like that, but to allow the ever-evolving world around us, this idea of transience, the deep transience of the world. To me, the Stephanie Bolster poem that I included on the steps of the Met contains that idea of transience and just a deep watching as the world shifts around us. And just looking at one thing, she looks at the bee. It's a bee, or is it a wasp? She looks at the bee. Oh, no, sorry, it's a wasp going into the can, and then another wasp, and they come out, and she remembers part of a painting, and it's all kind of happening around her. It's all gestural, but it's all quite clear and shifting. There's a sense of the deep transience of the gesture, which I love in that poem. The third idea that I'm going to look at, just touch on very quickly, is the trace of something left. So to me, this idea connected to Wabi-Sabi is, Wabi-Sabi I feel like partly is just about getting into a certain very present state of mind. And one way that has been described is it's learning to see the invisible. It's another way of just talking about feelings, right? So it's a quiet state of mind attainable by learning to see the invisible. So that's about attuning yourself to certain feelings, like when Jack Gilbert is talking about the antelope and it leaving. That's an invisible thing. Everything that has to do with feelings is invisible. So that's why I like this idea of sillage, the perfume that was in the room that is now leaving, or the thumbprint, which is about to get wiped away. The trace of the things that were there, which are rapidly leaving. So all these ideas are overlapping. Certainly the first one, the idea of decay is connected to mistakes, and the idea of impermanence is connected to the trace of something left. So all 3 of these are definitely blending together, but I hope by me talking about them and giving some examples, you can add a slightly more concrete idea to this very ephemeral aesthetic, which is Wabi-Sabi. So I'm going to stop there, but I've given you 3 prompts as well on that handout. Prompt 1 is a response to Jack Gilbert. So make a list of a bunch of failures and then write a poem which relishes at least one of those failures. The second prompt is a response to Robert Frost. So his poem, a very famous poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay. So at this point, so that's just about everything in flux all the time, like the seasons. So right now it's coronavirus time and we're losing so many things. So my idea for this second prompt was to take a step back, as Frost has done, and just try to see everything as it's changing and not to be so personally attached to it. Just see it all as shifting and not worry about it so much. Prompt 3, a response to Stephanie Bolster. So that would be to write a narrative poem that sets the scene of a day full of all these fleeting gestures and vanishing moments. So a day from your own life where you look very closely at things and just see how they're changing, and don't try to hold on to them. Just let them change. Let things die. Let people walk out the door. Let other people walk in the door without putting moral judgments on them. Okay, that's 15 minutes. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop there. I hope you've enjoyed Wabi-Sabi. Bye-bye.